Okay, wonderful. So we'll have Brian and Andrew to introduce yourself, and then you can start with your presentation. Thank you.
Sure. So my name is Andrew Jung.
And I'm Bren Joyce. We're from Stony Brook University. We are going to be presenting our research today.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Jung, and then this is Bren Joyce, and we will be presenting our research project on the effects of self-disclosure versus non-self-disclosure on the speaker's perception of self-esteem in adults who stutter. So first, let's talk about what stuttering is. Stuttering is a disorder of fluency in which involuntary movements of the articulators can disrupt the forward flow of speech, which can affect communication. And before jumping into our research, it is important that we discuss what self-disclosure is, first of all. Self-disclosure is a technique utilized where the speaker openly informs the listener of their stutter, reducing the pressure behind it and increasing feelings of self-empowerment. Self-disclosure is connected to stuttering because often stuttering can make those who stutter feel self-conscious about how they are perceived when interacting with others. In turn, our hypothesis was that those who self-disclose to others will have a higher self-esteem compared to those who do not self-disclose that stutter. However, we did not know for sure that this would be the case for everyone who stutters, and that is the purpose behind us doing our study.
Now we can talk a little bit about the methodology behind our research. For this project, our inclusion criteria were for adults 18 years and older who stutter. They needed to have reliable internet access and be able to read and understand English. The variables that we examined were the independent variable of self-disclosure versus non-self-disclosure, along with the dependent variable of self-perceived level of self-esteem. We also referenced the Rosenberg self-esteem scale in order to create and personalize our survey questions.
So this is our flyer that we distributed. So our survey was a cross-sectional quantitative design, which was anonymously distributed using social media. Participants who met the criteria had the opportunity to fill out a self-perceptual survey, including 14 speaking situation questions and 8 self-esteem questions. This included non-numeric Likert scale questions to rate themselves with how they identify in regards to disclosure or non-disclosure.
And now we can take a look at our data tables and results. So we have our t-test results and the average score of confidence and self-esteem. In total, we had 24 participants. 4 participants always disclosed, 2 participants never disclosed, and 18 participants sometimes disclosed. Our results yielded no statistical significance due to all p-values being greater than 0.05. These variables were then cross-examined, which showed that individuals who never disclose sometimes, sorry, 1 second, please. Individuals who never disclose showed to have a lower self-esteem than those who always and sometimes disclose, while individuals who never disclose their stutter showed to have a higher confidence level in comparison to those who always and sometimes disclosed.
Here are some of the responses from our participants when answering the open-ended question. Describe why you do or do not disclose your stutter. Let's look at some of the responses. So someone said, when I started talking to other people about my stutter, I began to feel more confident and my stuttering reduced. Someone else said, I do not disclose during a small interaction like a grocery store unless someone makes a snarky comment. Otherwise, for a conversation where my impression will be long-lasting, like a job interview, I disclose. Someone else said, it depends on the social situation. Sometimes it naturally comes up. Other times it doesn't. I don't shove it in people's faces. However, if my stutter is impacting my communication with new people, I will disclose. Very dependent on situation. Someone else said, it's useless to do. Past that. Someone else said, feels awkward, and I feel like I'm making a big deal out of it. If stuttering truly doesn't matter or isn't a big deal, then I shouldn't feel the need to always disclose. And lastly, someone else said, I stutter almost on every single word, so it's very noticeable at the moment I open my mouth. But I always say something about it to put the elephant out of the room. I use it as an icebreaker to feel more comfortable with myself and to make others feel more comfortable when talking with me. Hearing these perspectives is important because it informs healthcare providers on what it feels like to live with a stutter, and this can help positively shape intervention.
Now we can talk a little bit about our discussion and the conclusions that we have made from our study. Speech language pathologists can further bridge this gap through more research and through the use of counseling, so we can better understand the relationship of clients' self-esteem in conjunction with their confidence levels. Our results suggest that self-disclosure may improve an individual's self-esteem. Individuals who disclose may have higher self-esteem because of their acceptance of their identity as a person who stutters. Individuals who do not disclose may feel more confident. However, this may be due to avoidance behaviors. Overall, self-disclosure of their stutter was dependent on situational context, which include variables such as setting, interpersonal relationship, and how the individual perceives the noticeability of their stutter.
And lastly, let's talk about some of the limitations and future implications related to our study. So some of the limitations were the number of participants, limited variables tested, no demographic analysis, as well as an imbalance of data. So in future research should incorporate data inclusive to the length of disclosure, the onset of stuttering severity, the presence of avoidance behaviors, and demographic analysis. These are our references.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll hold questions until the end of the panel, and then we ask the audience and also panelists to give each other questions. So we'll do that at the end of the panel. So our next panelist is going to be Laura Perry, and the title is going to be Living with Disability, Uncovering the Invisible Case for Universal Design. Laura, you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. You can see my slides? Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Laura Perry, and I'm a graduate student in instructional design and educational technology at SUNY Potsdam. I am also Director of Academic Technology and Support at Clarkson University. Today, I'm excited to share with you the findings of a research project I've been working on, which focuses on students with disabilities and the barriers and consequences they face in their lived experiences. I'm grateful to have the chance to conduct this work with my professor, Dr. Karen Caldwell, who's here with us today, and advisor, Dr. Anthony Beatrice. I want to recognize their support and contributions to this project. Okay, so to help us get started, what I would like to do is ask you to find your chat button, chat space here. We're going to ask a couple of questions and have you ring in answers in the chat. So I'm going to show you a series of images, and I'd like for you to indicate whether or not the image represents something you consider to be a disability. So when I show the image, if you would just type in yes or Y or N or no in the chat to indicate whether you feel the image represents a disability, that would be great. So let's get started. So in this first image, we see an individual in a wheelchair, so might indicate a challenge associated with mobility. Would you consider this to be a disability? Okay, thanks. Thank you. Yes, lots of yeses. Okay, great. Moving on, we have an individual walking, looking like they are using perhaps a cane or assistive device, maybe to indicate a vision issue. Would this be a disability? Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then finally, we have an image that we're seeing two people conversing. It looks like maybe one person is using sign language. It may indicate that the other person has a issue concerning hearing. Would that be a disability? Okay, good. Lots of yeses. All right. So we're all in agreement here on those things. What I'm here to talk to you about today is that these types of disabilities are actually just the tip of the iceberg. And what my research found is that there's a whole lot more going on under the surface. So when we talk about the conditions that students reported in our survey, they reported things outside of vision, mobility, and hearing impairments for the most part. But rather, they reported on a broad range of conditions, most often characterized as invisible disabilities. So invisible disabilities refer to symptoms such as debilitating pain, fatigue, cognitive dysfunction, brain injuries, learning differences, and mental health disorders, as well as others. These are not always obvious to the onlooker, but can sometimes or always limit daily activities, ranging from mild challenges to severe limitations, and they vary from person to person. This is all according to the Invisible Disabilities Association, and I do have a link to this and other resources in my presentation later on. So the students in our survey that responded in our survey reported a range of conditions, including mental illness, phobias, exhaustion, chronic fatigue, anxiety, panic attacks, ADHD, severe nausea, eating disorders, dysgraphia, and depression, and there were more. And this is consistent with other sources, including the National Center for Education Statistics, who report mobility disabilities account for just 7% of students with disabilities, while sensory disabilities account equally for 7%, and chronic health conditions another 11%. And the remaining 72% of students with disabilities fall into categories relevant for cognitive disabilities, with learning disabilities such as dyslexia being 31% and ADHD being 18%. All this to say that we as educators have our work cut out for us as we aim to understand the broad range of disabilities and to respond accordingly with educational experiences that are responsive and flexible to meet those needs. So what we know is that students with disabilities make up 20% of the undergraduate population. This is according to the National Center for Educational Statistics. Similarly, we know that students with disabilities have a much lower sixth-year graduation rate than students without disabilities. This is according to the same source. So we asked, in order to learn about the lived experiences of students with disabilities, we asked students to tell us if they feel they experience barriers, consequences, supports, or opportunities because of their disabilities. Our survey instrument included closed and open-ended questions, and because we hope to both measure the percentage of students that indicated they did or did not experience barriers, we wanted to welcome the opportunity for students to share with us details of their experiences. We were very pleased with the quality of the responses that we did receive, and I'm happy to share those results with you here today. So in December 2023, we invited more than 500 undergraduate students with disabilities at 2 higher ed institutions in Northern New York to participate in an anonymous survey. The survey was sent to students that were registered with their Office of Accommodation. And the survey had 12 questions. Most of them were open text questions because we wanted students to submit their descriptions of the barriers. And this survey was part of an IBRB approved study, and we saw 7.4% return rate. So I want to acknowledge the support we received by both the Offices of Accommodations at both SUNY Potsdam and Clarkson University, who worked with us to distribute the survey invitation to students registered with their offices. I also want to recognize Teach Access, which is a 501c3 public charity organization whose mission is to bring industry, education, and disability advocacy organizations together to address the digital accessibility skills gap by equipping learners to build toward an inclusive world. And the Teach Access funded a grant program, which in part made this research possible. So on to our results. Now for a look at key findings. First, it's important to point out we received both quantitative and qualitative data from our survey. That goes back to the types of questions I mentioned earlier. From the closed questions, we required participants to select an answer. And from there, we could quantify the results and determine the percentage of respondents that answered one way or another. When students were asked whether they felt they experienced barriers in their lived experience, 80% indicated they did. Similarly, when we asked whether they felt they experienced consequences, 79% indicated they did. These are strikingly high percentages if you consider what barriers and consequences can do to the likeliness of success for a student. While these results were striking, what was even more impactful to us as researchers were the stories students told in the comments they submitted in the survey. While this qualitative data can be more challenging to quantify, we feel it is important to spend time with the results. Students told us about many different conditions and described the experiences they are having. We've grouped the comments into categories to make them easier to digest. We can see students described health-related challenges, academic challenges, accessibility issues, issues with emotional and mental health impacts, and those with social and environmental factors, educational system challenges, and finally, eating disorder impacts. So under the health-related challenges, if we dive deeper, we see that students talked about things like severe nausea affecting attendance, handwriting difficulty impacting note-taking when laptops are not allowed, panic attacks disrupting class and affecting academic performance, and testing anxiety. Also physical limitations, mobility issues, and chronic fatigue. Similarly, if we look into the academic challenges, we heard things like difficulty managing deadlines, judgment from professors and peers, and falling behind in academics due to illness, leading to potential course repetition. So to further illustrate the challenges students shared, I have a few direct quotes from the survey responses, and I would like to share a few of them with you now. So here's a direct comment from one of the responses. I have severe nausea that affects my my attendance in one class. I'm absolutely barred from getting an A or a B. So I hear that I'm past my time. I'm gonna wrap up here very quickly. So the idea here is that these items are going to help us in terms of support work in another project that we're developing a proof of concept that will help instructors embed accessibility into the lessons they are teaching. So I appreciate your time here today, and I will turn it back over.
Thank you very much for that presentation. The next presenter is going to be Shu Wan from University of Buffalo. This is the second time I saw him, so very nice seeing you and everyone else as well. The title of his talk is going to be The Formation of the Deaf Community in China, 1887 to 1940. Shu Wan,
thanks so
we can
much.
start.
I'll just share my screen. So hello everyone, thanks so much. Let me sure. I'm sorry. Oh, thanks so much. I feel delighted to present my research about the early history of Chinese deaf community in the especially in the early 20th century. So today my presentation mainly consists of 3 sessions. First one is the Chifu originate and Shanghai-centric network of deaf education evolved to a nationwide deaf community in China until 1937. The second session, I discussed the Chinese Association for Deaf and its wartime during World War II, its wartime activities. And then the last part is a brief conclusion. So regarding the history of deaf education in China, the most important person, the founder or founding mother of Chinese deaf education was an American female missionary who originally come from Rochester, and her name is Anita Mills. She was trained and graduated from the Rochester School for the Deaf, and then she moved to China and stayed there for a few decades and founded the first deaf school for Chinese kids in Chifu, a city in the north part of China. So here is her photo, and here is the photo of Anita Mills and her student and the colleagues in the Chifu school for deaf. So after the Chifu school, there's a large number of deaf school was, the deaf education flourished in China after the foundation of deaf school, first deaf school in Chifu. It's partially because a lot of deaf teachers in those following school, they were graduates of the deaf school. So the school is not only a school for deaf kids, also a normal school, a school for training deaf teachers. So here's one example. The first deaf school in China founded by the Chinese person is called Shi Ruiting Deaf School in Hangzhou, and which was founded in 1914. So the founder is the Chinese professor whose name is Zhou Yaoxian. He was also a Christian person, and his children, his son Zhou Tianfu was a deaf kid, and graduated from Anita Mills Deaf School in Chifu. After her graduate, Tianfu's father Zhou Yaoxian founded a deaf school, first Chinese deaf school for his kids, and appointed his kid Tianfu as the head teacher there. So but this deaf school was short-lived. It just stayed for a few years because of the early death of Zhou Yaoxian, both the founder and the sponsor for that school. But the school, while it was suspended for a few years, as later on was reopened by the Chinese missionary, whose name is Yu Guozhen, and renamed the school to Fuhui Deaf School. And then Yu Guozhen, the missionary, also hired Zhou Tianfu as a head teacher later. But here's a question. This one, as I mentioned, the first Chinese deaf school was founded by Chinese people was opened by individual, by those nodal officers. Both Zhou Yaoxian and Zhou Tianfu, they were not affiliated like an employee of the Chinese government. But how did the Chinese government, at that time the Qing government, thought about deaf education in the late 19th century? So according to my research, the first person who may have known deaf education is Rong Hong, who came to U.S. in the 1840s and graduate and become the first graduate of Yale College. After his graduation, he returned to China and became officers to work for Chinese government. But it's very interesting because during his stay in Yale, he made a friend with the founder of Gallaudet University, the College for Deaf People. And it's in his memoir, he mentioned he stayed a few days in the William Gallo's home with them together. But it's very interesting. He, in his memoir, didn't mention that at all, but it's pretty sure they must have talked about the application. Even so, while he returned to China and became a founder of the first Chinese exchange student program in the 1970s, he didn't consider add the special education into the program. So besides Rong Hong, another important Chinese person in the deaf history is called Zhang Jian. his knowledge of deaf education was not come from US but come from Japan. When he in the late Qing, initially Zhang Jian was the officer of the Qing government. He visited deaf-blind schools in Japan and returned and sent a letter to the emperor to suggest building a similar institution like a deaf-blind school in China. But at that time, the Qing government, in terms of developing modern education, the government, the policymaker, they thought highly of normal education, of teachers' education instead of deaf education. Even so, Zhang Jian, the person, the individual himself, he used his money because in the meantime he was a successful businessman. He built his own deaf-blind school affiliated to his factory, affiliated to his business in his hometown, Nantong. So here's two photos. This photo is the deaf-blind school he visited in Kyoto. This one is the first blind deaf school founded by him in Nantong. So in this sense, we can identify two patterns or two model of deaf in China. First one is a German-British style of model deaf blind education. It means that the blind student and deaf student, they stay in the same classroom in the same school. This style of deaf blind education was incorporated into China by Zhang Jian. Another style is we may call it the French-American style of deaf education. In this case, deaf student and blind student, they were not put into the same classroom or school, but have an independent deaf education, deaf school. This kind of deaf education was founded and spread by Anita Mills into China and across different parts of China. Despite the coincidence of the American and American style, a Japanese and American style of deaf education in the history of early deaf history in China, their shared trait, reliance on government sponsorship, rarely affected their Chinese counterparts. As I mentioned, both Zhang Jian's deaf school and Anita Mills' deaf school, initially, they were not funded and supported by the government financially. It was supported by the private sectors. So, after that, after the proliferation of deaf school in China, Shanghai then became the center of deaf education in the 1930s. So local school I mentioned earlier, they were founded in the late 1890s and the early 1910s. So after like 3 decades after that period, according to a Shanghai journalist survey, there was 13 deaf schools in China, but most of them were located in Shanghai and the surrounding area. So in this sense, Shanghai became a center of deaf education in the early 20th century. And the interesting thing is that most of those deaf schools are financially supported by successful businessmen and charitable organizations. Again, no government there. So that's a big trait of a deaf education in China. Most deaf schools, they were private deaf schools. The only exception is the deaf school in Nanjing, the capital of the Republic of China. This one is the only public deaf school in China before the victory of the Communist Revolution. There's only deaf school in first half of 20th century. There are many deaf schools in China, but only one of them was a public deaf school. So even as I mentioned, there are two patterns of deaf school, American model and Japanese model. Chief school for deaf bridge the two model, the two style, two way of deaf education. Why? Because on both sides, most deaf teachers, as I mentioned, deaf teacher, when I say deaf teacher, means that though they were not a hearing person, but deaf teacher with hearing impairments or difficulty, they were graduated from chief school. So those chief schools alumnus graduates, they are social network who reach those deaf school in different parts of China, or those deaf teachers in different deaf school across China, while they work for different school, but they have the same, they graduated from same school, and they may be classmates when they stay in school. So as a result, in the 1936, the Shanghai, as I mentioned, one thing, those deaf teachers across China, they know each other. Second thing, most deaf schools surrounding Shanghai. So those deaf chief who graduated Shanghai nearby deaf teachers, deaf elites, they gather, they take a convention in Shanghai, and the plan to launch first national organization for the deaf teacher, or for the deaf people. One thing is very interesting. While today, when we talk about deaf education, that's a big issue, is to avoid the medical model, to borrow a term from disability study, medical model to understand that, especially deafness. Usually, for most deaf scholars in the United States, it's a census, it's an agreement that we don't think deaf is one kind of disability and or illness. But that's very interesting in the discourse, in the rhetoric of deaf education in China in the early 20th century. Among those deaf people, deaf elites, deaf teacher, they call themselves Tongbing. It means people suffering from same impairment. Well, it's a very medical model, but it's true. They call each other Tongbing, people suffering from the same illness or impairment. And they always say, oh, our Tongbing across China, we need to gather together and to do something to build our own organization. So
I'm so sorry to interject, Shu Yan.
Sorry.
Wait,
I'm sorry,
the time has
sorry.
been up a while ago.
Okay,
Yeah,
so-
can you just wrap up maybe?
So finally,
Okay,
just a conclusion. So my conclusion is very simple. So my research, I propose to do active and positive narrative of Chinese deaf history instead of merely a social welfare history about deaf people. So they took their agency in the early 20th century, those deaf people thinking.
Okay, thank you very much, and we'll hurry along. And last presenter is going to be Haley Weiner, and the title is going to be From the Personal to the Professional: International Student Experiences of Seeking Employment.
Hi everyone, my name is Haley Weiner and I'm a current graduate level student at SUNY Oswego, and in coordination with SUNY Oswego professor Dr. Peter Gazarian, we conducted research entitled From the Personal to the Professional: International Student Experiences of Seeking Employment. So as an introduction, today I will be outlining our research investigating the personal growth, economic pressures, and job-seeking experiences of international students pursuing study abroad in the United States. Their work contrasts between student acculturation with their economic challenges, and this research is significant as it provides insight for higher education professionals on the dual experiences of international students, humanizing their study abroad experiences and their economic realities. For a basic overview, Dr. Gazarian and I conducted an in-depth literature review, which included three main themes of job searches, resources for international student employment, and a plan versus reality of international student experiences. Now, our overall research coincides with a conceptual framework of Funkel's model from the year 2021, which utilizes educational, aspirational, experiential, and economic rationales to frame student motivations. This conceptual framework is applicable in our study as it helps in explaining the intersection of student personal aspirations with their professional pressures. In terms of research method, we conducted a phenomenological study which focused on the lived experiences of international students and the shared experiences which were unique to each student but also shared with all students. We also incorporated a mixed insider-outsider perspective, and we utilized criterion sampling as a purposeful sampling technique to ensure that students were appropriate participants for the study. For each student who was interviewed, we conducted semi-structured recorded interviews for which we then formulated transcribed recordings and followed by an interview recording process. In terms of participants, we had 10 different participants throughout different nations who are international students at the undergraduate level or were recent international students. And as you can see here, each student was provided with a pseudonym, and in interview consent forms, they provided to us their sex, their nationality, and their current student status. In terms of results, I would like to first outline that navigating cultural and professional barriers was a common result as students experienced significant cultural adaptation and they faced professional barriers in terms of employment eligibility and workplace integration. There was also a common result of economic pressures and uncertainties, where international students frequently encountered financial challenges and the stress of securing employment within tight visa regulations and post-graduation. The role of social networks and institutional support is important as building off of local connections and receiving effective institutional support works to enhance employment opportunities and cultural acclimation. Now, as I continue with our results, I will be outlining for you 7 main themes that tie back to our conceptual framework. The first is aspirational and educational rationale, followed by economic rationale, and then experiential rationale, personal change, economic pressure, barriers to employment, and resources and suggestions. To jump into our aspirational and educational rationale, many students noted that there was more diverse majors of study which were available in the United States, and this directly contributed to potential career opportunities in niche fields and the ability to pursue one's professional dreams. So one participant, Hina, who is from India, mentioned specifically, geology is not really a popular subject back in India. There are very few and limited schooling options that provide geology as a major of study. Usually, schools in India offer geoengineering or some kind of branch to the subject, but not the science of geology. This led me to look at different places where geology majors were offered. And similar to Hina, other participants holding both an aspirational and educational rationale in their decision to study in the United States, outlined pathways that consisted of goals related to pursuing a specific field and learning methods that would not be readily available in their home country. In terms of economic rationale, international students discussed an economic rationale consisting of investment and opportunities for studying abroad in the United States. They provided details regarding post-graduation life and work opportunities that become available as a result of earning a degree in a United States higher ed institution. For example, Nathaniel from the Bahamas mentioned, a lot of international students think about the value of a degree earned from the United States versus a degree earned in their home country. Similarly, Kabir from Nepal mentioned, I wanted to come to the United States because of the opportunities post-graduation related to work. In this sense, participant responses demonstrated a broader economic motivation underpinning study abroad among the participants and framing the United States degree as a means to an end. In terms of experiential rationale, the study abroad experience was viewed not just as an academic endeavor, but as this transformative journey that shaped students into versatile, independent, and culturally aware adults. Jisha from India stated, one of the reasons why I wanted to move to a different country was that I wanted to learn to do things on my own, like handle my finances. I pay most of my tuition fees or as much as I can on my own, and I ask my parents for help with the rest. All of my other expenses, like buying groceries and other stuff, I do that on my own. It's been a little harder to do things on my own as I have to work 20 hours a week and then be a full-time student. To continue off of this idea, many students shared information related to personal change. In this sense, participants revealed that integration into the United States academic and social culture contributed to their personal change. There was a spectrum of personal change which underscored the varied ways in which individuals engage with and adapt to their new cultural environment. Anya from India stated, "You observe the thought process of American peers, and eventually what happens is you become a part of their thinking and adopt some new things." This transition towards incorporating United States cultural values was not merely superficial, but involved a deeper engagement with new culture that shaped participants' thought processes and perspectives. On the next theme, economic pressure, participants described how their international student status contributed to economic pressures. Shared concerns arose related to cost and economic consequences associated with the decision to pursue a United States higher education degree. For example, Ezra from Malaysia stated, "Everything that I do, it's almost always about how to find a job after I graduate, because I spend a big chunk of money when I came here, and of course, I'm hopeful that I could return some of this to my family." The economic realities for international students can significantly diminish the overall study abroad experience, and these economic pressures not only influence their academic performance and their professional well-being, personal well-being, but it can also shape their professional trajectories and their legal status in the United States. In terms of barriers to employment, participants reported various barriers to obtaining employment specifically related to their search for work, utilizing both the CPT and OPT employment authorizations. These barriers to employment included student ignorance, discrimination, employers, visa regulations, and institutional resources. Kama from Nepal stated, "I have noticed that employers look for American citizens. This has been difficult as they don't explicitly say that in job descriptions, but they also ask you about US citizenship on applications." And our final main theme was resource and suggestions. In this, participants outlined resources and provided suggestions based on their experiences in seeking employment opportunities in the United States. And suggestions were provided in response to both institutional and federal policies. Carla from Nepal mentioned, "It would be wonderful if I could get a 3-year OPT instead of 1 year. It would certainly make things a lot easier coming out of OPT and asking for visa sponsorship, because companies are more likely to sponsor a senior level or mid-level position, not an entry-level position." And the overall experiences and suggestions of participants emphasized the necessity for a more supportive and inclusive approach to international student employment. Now, to wrap everything up, I would like to provide 3 main implications. The first is enhancing supportive services. Institutions need to improve improve career and counseling services to better address the unique challenges faced by international students, including tailored guidance on visa regulations and employment strategies. Next, policy recommendations. Advocating for policy adjustments that extend work authorization periods and reduce employment barriers for international students can ease their transition into the United States workforce. And finally, future directions. Further studies did recommend to explore the impact of regional differences and field-specific experiences on international student success and their integration into the United States, which would be something that, if this study were to go further, would be a great option. Now, that is all I
Thank you
have.
very much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 6 minutes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We actually have 16 minutes, right? We end at 12:10. So we do have some time for discussion questions. And I also have questions for each of your panelists, but I'll wait until I hear from the audience. So you can use the chat or just start asking questions if you're ready.
I'll go ahead and start. I've actually got a question for Laura and a question for Haley. Laura, with your background in instructional design, I do a lot of work in the faculty development area as well. I'd like to know what insights you got out of surveying the students you surveyed in terms of how you would better support faculty in allowing them to support their students with disabilities. Because from the faculty perspective, I mean, it just seems like the workload around supporting our students with disabilities is just increasing all the time. And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And Haley, you had some implications at the end. I was wondering if you could speak more specifically as to whether you'd have any recommendations for international programming offices specifically on our campuses. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Great question. We have been giving that some thought. We have a couple of ideas on that. One is we have an kind of a workshop in concept developing where we present these range of challenges that we heard about with faculty and have them sort of crowdsource or work together to problem solve, right? So the idea being, you know, these students brought forward challenges that they're experiencing. We give them back to faculty sort of in a workshop scenario and have them work together to come up with alternatives or ways of modifying their course design. The other, so there's another concept I'm working on and we'll be presenting in my poster later on this afternoon around utilizing AI, maybe a ChatGPT tool to sort of query AI for potential barriers on a course policy. So put in a scenario to ChatGPT of what your course design is and have it give it back to you the potential barriers that students of varying needs may experience. And so the other concept that we're sort of curious about maybe using is to have instructors utilize a tool like I use, the survey tool, to query students directly as far as range of issues and challenges that they may be experiencing so that modifications can be made. So those are some ideas that we've had.
Cool.
Yeah, to jump in and answer your second question, I'm actually currently I have a graduate fellowship with the International Student Office at SUNY Oswego's campus, and I act as what's known as a DSO or a designated school official in terms of immigration advising for students. And so based off of this, I think there could be a big potential for like cross collaboration between different on-campus offices, like for example, international students and career service offices. Because a lot of times international students will come to their international student office for career advice, but international student offices provide immigration advising, and we're not qualified for something like career advisement. And there are often like career or internship fairs that do take place on campus, but sometimes transparency is not there for students in terms of who might accept OPT, who might accept CPT, or in terms of long-term, because OPT and CPT are kind of temporary or limited basis employment. So having that transparency between the offices could be useful, and maybe having a way in which institutions have partnerships with local businesses or larger businesses who are open to hiring international students, whether those partnerships are with the international office or the career services office, could also be useful.
Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much for the responses and also for the question. So our next question is going to be from Isabel.
Yeah, well, thank you for your excellent presentations. I have a question pretty much to link what we heard from the keynote speaker in this section. I wonder if you have any of you thought about or heard about some kind of AI tools and the AI role in the particular kind of diversity challenges that you were presenting. Not that although I'm an AI researcher, but I'm not 100% for AI, and I'm all for responsible AI, but I think AI, in in a lot of health care challenges, as Professor Farron was explaining, can help, for example, in the diagnosis, treatment recommendation, etc. So I was just wondering whether you had any insight about that in any of your research areas.
I can jump in. In terms of my specific research, I believe that AI could be utilized as a tool in terms of sharing knowledge or sharing regulations and rules, specifically for the international student population. There are a lot of like visa and immigration policies that are not common knowledge to international students, and the policies and procedures are subject to change at certain times, so it makes it more challenging for students. In terms of AI, I could actually think of an example where right now my office is implementing an AI like chat box where students can kind of send a chat and provide like very brief like multiple choice answers, and it would allow the student to have a direct reply of whether they are eligible for certain employment authorizations or not without needing to have direct contact with an immigration advisor.
Do we have other responses?
I have a question, but I also have kind of a response to Isabel's question as well. I think that the trouble with trying to apply these predictive models to social sciences research is that a lot of the data that we would need just isn't available. We don't have these vast databases tracking the experiences of all of these types of individuals and the types of issues they're dealing with that we could then use to feed the models in order to come up with a predictive model and identify decisive factors and what's influencing their experiences. And so I think that's the struggle to apply some of the new machine learning models to social sciences research, is that we just lack the same amount of data that we see, for example, in the medical field. But my question was for Andrew and Bren. I found your study very interesting, and I'm curious moving forward if you're planning to build on that or what next steps you're planning to take based on the findings of the research that you conducted.
Andrew and Bren, you want to respond?
Yes, so there's actually us directly, we were not planning on going any further with our research. However, the cohort behind us in our graduate program is doing a similar study, and we hope that they can carry out some of the limitations that were included in our study into theirs.
We would love to have this study continue and to kind of put forth more information going forward in the future, as Andrew said, into the next fluency study. Hopefully they can target some of these limitations and have a larger sample size and look into more of the variables that can be tested and more cross-examined to find more concrete results.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to ask questions for each panelist. If we don't have any other audience who would like to raise your hand. So my first question is for Andrew and Bren. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I understand in your presentation you mentioned that the group of individuals who have never disclosed the stutter tend to have more confidence of themselves, and that you said is related to the avoidance behaviors, but your paper didn't have time to elaborate what you mean by avoidance behaviors and how the avoidance behaviors can have the impact on the sense of confidence. And I also wonder if the extent to which a person will feel more confident who stutters might have something to do with the fact, that early on in their childhood education, maybe the parents have more resources and get them in touch with therapists and people who can help out with their self-esteem. I mean, if that also factor into, how they see themselves and the extent to which they have a certain degree of confidence. So that's the first question for you guys. And the second question I have for Laura is, at SUNY Cortland, I'm at SUNY Cortland, and every semester when I teach, the accessibility departments, and they will contact me and tell me that certain students need accessibility, and what I have to do is to provide notes for them and provide any kind of test accommodation and all those kind of things for the students. So from your research, what kind of extension of the service that the professors can do to the students that the SUNY campuses have not really touched on? So I would like you to elaborate on that. So my next question is for Shu. Once again, you know, all of you guys, wonderful presentations. I loved your content, methodology, and significance, and so on of your research. So Shu, my question for you is, I wonder about the cultural ramifications and the cultural significance of these private-owned and also Western-inspired, whether Japan is considered also like a Western nation to China, and France and US. How are these, you know, I mean, these private sectors and private-owned and Western-inspired deaf institutions, how did they penetrate, and were they able to penetrate the mainstream society in terms of the cultural ramifications of whether this is progress, this is emblematic of China's nation's strengths, or some kind of step forward. The reason I ask is because I think just as a comparative point, in the US, we know that the disability policy by FDR and also the government attention to disability, people with disability, was a historical milestone for people with disability in the US. And generally, you know, it was well respected and admired by many nations as a kind of more advanced, if I could say. I mean, that's not really anthropological cultural relatives the term, but in many nations, you see it as an example to emulate. For instance, in the restrooms in the US, you know, you have ramp, and you have a stall for people with disability, but you don't really see that, for instance, in China. So as I grew up, you know, I was educated and in China and grew up in China. I've really never seen deaf institutions, or never really seen much of disability people on the street. And here at SUNY Cortland, when I teach on China or medical anthropology, you know, there's a class on disability, and my students who've been to China will ask me, how come I'm never seeing people with disability in China? Because it's out of sight, and you don't really see much accommodation of that. So I wonder, during that historical period when you did your study, what was the cultural ramification? What's the cultural significance of this? Is this seen as emblem of progress, of step forward, or is this seen as superfluous? So that's my question. And then Haley, oh, I think I'll stop here because we only have 2 minutes. So I'll stop here. So please, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
So firstly, we would like to thank you for your questions. To address your first question about avoidance, we would like to remind everyone that only 2 participants said that they never disclose. So already we're having that imbalance of data, while 18 sometimes disclose and 4 always disclose. So already we're having an imbalance of data showing that only 2 never disclose. To talk more about those avoidant behaviors, to give some examples for those who maybe are unfamiliar with avoidance behaviors regards to fluency, this can be straight out refusal to speak, removing oneself from certain situations, not introducing yourself, such as like at a party or a work meeting, not answering the phone. So in order to remove that they're removing that barrier from themselves, so they're never disclosing, and that's why we're seeing that suggested higher confidence level. We don't have enough data to support this concrete answer to say this is the reason why this avoidance behavior is occurring. This is just a suggestion just because of our small pool of participants. And then to answer your second question, we would love to consider in going forward in the future study more of these factors. While we did have a small demographic portion within our survey, we made it optional in order to get more participants to participate. We found that if we had made our demographic questions mandatory, that many participants would not have completed our survey. So in order to do so, we made it optional. And by doing so, only a few participants fully completed out their demographic information. Going forward in the future, it would be great to collect more information on education level, access to certain materials, and more of these variables that we can analyze to further see the result on fluency. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I'll just say I love your question. Quick recap, your question was, how can we help faculty manage these challenges associated with disabilities? And I love it because actually that is the continuing work that we're doing in our overall project, which is to help people in general, whether across different disciplines, whether they're educators, engineers, scientists, designers, to embed techniques to consider accessibility consider accessibility in their design. So in design of your course, as an example, as you're putting policies together and practices within your course design, you're taking these variety of needs into account. Often when we're talking, and we can look to universal design for learning as for techniques to manage this. If you look at universal design for learning, it offers opportunities or encourages faculty to use choice in terms of range of assessments, as well as building in flexibility. There's also best practices around, providing recordings and providing captions with recordings and transcripts and other specific, methods to make it more inclusive or more accessible for all, right? So if you are making it accessible for somebody with a permanent disability, you are also making it accessible for others that may have temporary or situational disabilities. And so that's just a real quick recap, but thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your question, Dr. Jen. I mean, here's my brief answer. One thing is that, of course, in late Qing and early Republican periods, the Chinese government understood disability deaf within the framework of deaf education within the framework of modernity, but it's marginalized within its agenda of modernizing China. Here's an interesting example in terms of this general sense of the broader range of disability, compared to like madness, mental health issue and mental disorders. For that case, the Chinese government and the officers, they thought highly of the big issue, thought highly of the institutionalization of people with madness. Well, also in the same work, they say, oh, we don't have this kind of institution. Which means this one, institutionalization of mad people is a modern thing. We need to incorporate this kind of system into China, mental health system into China. But for deaf people, they didn't until the end of World War II. Partially because the deaf community had mentioned a network, deaf people's network, they tried to lobby the Republican government and persuade the central government in Nanjing to take serious a big issue and try to conduct the first official nationwide survey of deaf people. And this one is planned to pave the ground for the proliferation of public deaf education system, while this kind of agenda procedure was interrupted by the Communist Revolution. So here's a story from late 19th century to mid 20th century.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this wonderful, wonderful presentations and great research. And please carry on. And looking forward to seeing you guys in the future. Bye-bye, everyone.